Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekha Chariwag, Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. I am coordinating the paper on Sociology of Gender. Today we are going to discuss the module on gender and health. We need to understand that health plays a very important role in addressing the issues of quality of life of population, especially in terms of its linkages with women's health. Further, health within a population is very closely indicator in terms of the initial health of the people, especially in terms of development trajectory and in terms of their own development. Further, we need to understand that how government policies and institutions have addressed the issues of women's health in India. In this module, we are going to focus on women's health, especially in terms of the focus on its reproductive health, the whole issues of anemia within women, and how in all it has affected women's position within the society. Gender and health. This module is divided into the following 4 sections in an attempt to present a brief overview of how gender and health are related. Causes of poor quality of women's health, women's roles and reproductive health policy, increasing medicalization of reproduction, and reconceptualizing gender and health. Section 1. Causes of poor quality of women's health. Women in India are an at-risk group as far as health is concerned. This is largely due to the lack of conception of women as an independent category. The health industry and the state health policies focus on women's reproductive health. The high-risk periods in their lives are clearly early childhood and reproductive years. Inadequate and poor nutrition, non-access to primary health care, poor reproductive health, and discrimination against girls are 4 major causes for higher female mortality between ages of 1 and 5 and higher maternal mortality rates. Gender disparity in nutrition starts from infancy to adulthood. Girls are breastfed less in infancy. Malnutrition is an underlying cause of death among girls below the age of 5. Nutritional deprivation among girls leads to improper growth and anemia. Anemia is more prevalent among girls, pregnant and lactating women. This is not only complicate childbearing and result in maternal and infant deaths, maternal depression and low birth weight infants, but also severely affect women's productivity and quality of life. One of the reasons for this persisting gender difference in health is the existence of male preference in the socio-cultural milieu of India. Male preference in India stem from the patriarchal social setup which undervalues women and the productive labor. Women are seen as temporary members of the natal families and as such are viewed as reason of drainage of wealth. Sons, on the hand, are seen as the productive members of the economic labor force and as permanent members of the families. They are valued as breadwinners and are seen as providing support in the old age. Socially, women are seen as potentially threatening to families or larger communities' honor and status. Division of labor within households follows stringent gender ideologies where women are seen as relegated to the domestic arena and looked upon as caregivers and nurturers, whereas men are seen as bringing in monetary remuneration from work outside the domestic sphere. The sexual division of labor and further the division of labor among women of the household has implication for the woman's health at 2 levels. Firstly, in terms of actual physical burden imposed by the continuous labor with little respite due to weakness or illness. Secondly, the continuous daily demands made on women's time makes it very difficult for them to take time out to consult health specialists. The desire of women to have children, daughters to help at home when they are young, and sons to bring in their wives' labor works significantly towards achieving a reduction in their work burden. In India, most of the women are still not receiving good health facilities. Poor condition of women can be seen in the availing nutritious food, prevalence of anemia, nutritional status of women. In India, sex preference is mainly manifested in the form of excessive female mortality of the female child. The poor health status of female relatively to males is found due to the discrimination against females in the allocation of food and health care within household. It is not so much an equitable distribution of food in the household which is a question as the fact that women deny the food to themselves. This fact points to the important role of gender ideologies in the inequitable distribution of resources in the household and its implications for women and children's health. There is gender discrimination in childhood feeding, immunization coverage, treatment seeking, and nutritional status. According to National Family Health Survey, 3 women consume less nutritious food than men. It is a major cause of problem in India. Anemia, especially among women and children, and can result in maternal mortality, weakness, diminished physical and mental capacity, increased morbidity from infectious diseases, prenatal mortality, premature delivery, and low birth weight. NFHS show gender differentials in anemia levels for women and men. 55.3% of women and 24.2% of men whose hemoglobin levels were tested were found to be anemic. 39% of women are mildly anemic and 16% are moderately anemic and 2% are severely anemic. Prevalence of anemia for the ever married woman has increased from 52% to 56% in National Family Health Survey 3. Therefore, anemia situation has worsened over time for both women and young children. Differences in nutritional intake have long-term consequences, especially as women enter the reproductive stages. Maternal mortality and infant mortality rates are directly related to the variable of nutritional intake. Anemic women face a major threat of death from childbirth, and same goes for children born to them. Various researchers also point to the fact that women's economic dependency on male relatives creates an impetus to deny themselves health services in a culture of silence because of the lower bargaining power within the household, combined with inaccess to public health care, which results in seeking private medical attention, which is more expensive, acts as a deterrent to seeking help in matters of health until the conditions deteriorates to the point where it cannot be ignored. Especially for households from low socioeconomic strata, treatment cannot always be sustained for long periods and is discontinued the moment there are any signs of patient getting better. Women's reproductive ailments, particularly if they are in the childbearing years, tend to receive more immediate attention than the problems among adolescents or in older women. This is because men as husbands also give importance and value to the reproductive capacity of the woman. In general, there is a great reticence in talking about reproductive alignments between reproductive ailments between men and women, as well as men, as it's seen as embarrassing and shameful. This overarching focus on women's role as mothers is echoed in the larger patriarchal and paternalistic state policies for health concern, as is seen in the next segment. Women's role and reproductive health policies. Women's health in India is largely a demographic concern. Indian state has been preoccupied with lowering of the population size since its inception of the first 5-year plan. The Family Planning Association of India recognizes and identifies 2 strands or components of the National Family Planning Program, that is, planning of family and population control. In the view of Jyotsna Agnihotri Gupta, what had started out as a family planning meant to met out the awareness regarding fertility management, especially for women, so that they could have control over their own life, turned into a full-fledged population control program which was administered not only by Indian government but being modeled after Western population policies, and also held vested interest for and was monitored and funded by various international aid agencies. Gupta maintains that far more funds were allocated towards acceptance and development of contraceptives rather than the health aspect of the program. Gupta notes that Indian government has not given much importance to women's autonomy or empowerment and is rather as a result-driven population control program. It has consistently used target-oriented methods in reducing birth rates by encouraging acceptance of certain methods, in particular sterilization. Since the early 1950s, when the Indian government initiated Family Welfare Program, control of a growing population has been a key policy objective. Almost from the beginning, the government sought to control population size through a complex systems of targets for each contraceptive method. More importantly, the locus of official birth control policy shifted to the woman's body, and contraceptive methods developed internationally during the 1960s and the 1970s, such as the pill and the IUD, which ironically were seen as a major tools for female emancipation internationally, now became central to the national population control and reproductive health policies. According to Jijboy, the fact of these policies being based on democratic targets proved them to be unbalanced, focusing on immunization and the provision of iron and folic acid rather than on sustained care of women or the detection and referral of high-risk cases. The highest target was set for sterilization, since this permanently sealed women's capacity to bear children. In reality, the system worked like a top-down chain. The central government allocated separate yearly targets for the desired number of sterilizations, IUDs, condoms, oral pills, etc. each state. State in turn allocated these targets to district, sub-district and primary health centers. In order to meet the mandates of these stipulated targets, the system ended up producing highly pressured government officials anxious to fill targets and a system that slowly degenerated into abuse of people's rights. This has particularly been detrimental for women from lower economic strata who are forced to use government clinics as they cannot afford others and therefore are almost pushed into accepting birth control methods advocated by family planning program. This state control mechanism of population control has direct implications for women and the power over their own bodies and their autonomy on fertility management. Since the mid-1960s, the government has attempted in succession to integrate family planning with other programs such as maternal child health and child survival and safe motherhood. This was also an attempt by the government to leave behind the target-based approach and focused on the health aspect. Thus, by 1990s, the family planning initiative became the reproductive and child health policy. This joint health policy for women and children is questionable from many perspectives. Chatterjee put forth that the family welfare concern with meeting targets had resulted in a delivery system that views women's roles primarily as reproducers rather than producers in the economy. This construction of women has had two implications for women. The health delivery system tended to ignore the provision of a general health care for all women, and the system tended to overlook women who did not fall into the reproductive age category, for instance, adolescent girls, unmarried women, postmenopausal and infertile women. Reproductive health policies in general and by virtue of being imbibed within this, women's health has been focused on from the focal point of looking at women as mothers. Motherhood is seen as an extension of womanhood, thereby making the woman-child dyad the central concern of health policies. The idea behind such policies is to provide women with health care to the extent that their children are born and raised healthy. Kumar notes that women then are not treated as a category for development in themselves, but rather health policies directed towards maternal and child care took an instrumentalist approach towards women, signifying that policymakers saw women as significant only in the social roles as mothers. This construction of women within the parameters of motherhood tends to exclude rather than include women from a wider range. Extrapolating from the objectives of the reproductive and child health policy initiative, Kumar concludes that women are also constructed as instrumental to the nation's larger socioeconomic perspective. Better maternal health care is seen as imperative in not only reducing maternal and child mortality rates but also seen as a way to reduce the financial burden of an ailing population on the nation state. Jeechboy, in an analysis of the data gathered by National Family Health Surveys, notes that women's ability to exercise their reproductive choice is one of the major areas where there is data lag. The NHFS has been instrumental in gathering estimates pertaining to fertility, infant and child mortality, maternal and child health care, utilization of services provided for the same. To elucidate, the NHFS provides detailed insights into contraceptive behavior in India, the trend largely being that most couples are protected by female sterilization or the female method of contraception. This is consistent with the priorities of the target-oriented family planning initiatives of the government. The emphasis on terminal contraception methods has led to young women being unprotected from unwanted and closely paced pregnancies. Jeechboy states that lack of awareness among non-terminal contraceptive methods leads to women making uninformed choices regarding their reproductive health. The NFHS is unable to ascertain the extent to which women can make informed choices without any coercion and the constraints they might face in accessing follow-up health care. Another example of a major gap that is not addressed by the NHFS is the lack of awareness regarding the legality of abortions and the lack of information regarding infertility. According to Jeechboy, the NFHS refers only to married women and does not take into account the sexual behavior of adolescent girls and the risk associated with lack of awareness regarding safe sex practices. Such lags in data point to the prevalence of traditional views regarding the role of the woman in family, sexual and contraceptive behavior only within the institution of marriage, and a lack of understanding of reproductive health as a woman's right concern. Section 3. Increasing medicalization of reproduction. As it can be seen from the earlier arguments and segments, a woman's role as reproducers has garnered a lot of interest rather than their general overall health. Women's reproductive capacities and abilities have always been an object of interest for the field of medicine, and medicalization of reproduction is not a new concept. Starting with the invention of the cesarean birthing techniques to contraceptive methods like the condom and the pill, which help manage fertility, to technologies that help conceive like IVF and IUI. This directs to the way medicine has formed a huge stronghold in the field of women's reproduction. In contemporary times, new reproductive technologies or assisted reproductive technologies have come to the forefront of this medical intervention in reproduction. These new technologies have brought in a different array of regulatory practices for women to follow and to adhere to. This increasing medicalization of women's reproductive lives is a matter of concern, especially in the context of already existing skewed policies for population control. Medicalization refers to the process of transforming a previously natural, social, or behavioral entity into a medical one, thereby requiring medical attention and expertise. ARTs have been on the scene since the 1970s, and since the onset of assisted reproduction methods, fertility has become a rising concern. It is important to note that infertility was not a concern for state policies or for private practitioners before the advent of ARTs. On the other hand, with emphasis on lowering population rates, infertility was not even considered as a demographic variable. Medicalization also entails social construction of what is normal and what is not, and hence needs to be corrected. It involved methods of regulation and social control. According to Bell, the primary forms of social control and associated with medicalization of infertility is the maintenance of norms regarding family and children. That is, who should have children, and having children after marriage is normal, thereby making the category of not having children abnormal. The invention of artificial insemination and other associated technologies like in vitro fertilization, donor sperms, eggs was initially seen as a way of liberating women from politics of reproduction within a patriarchal frame. These technologies were touted as a tool of female liberation, as it would give women the right over their own reproductive abilities. On the contrary, these new technologies work within the frame of patriarchy and are guided by traditional notions of women's role in society as mothers. The medical world tends to reinforce the social and cultural practices, constructs of women as mothers, making infertility like fertility fall within the purview of women and more the responsibility than that of men. Motherhood and medicalization together have formed a narrative which excludes women who are childless and creates a mandate to engage with such technology in order to become normal. This imperative is further compounded by inherent class distinctions in terms of who can avail or afford these technologies. With a public health setup that is focused on lowering population and managing quality of population growth through better maternal and child care, ARTs fall in the realm of a highly expensive privatized market, making it difficult to be accessed by couples, women from lower economic social backgrounds. Together, these trends seem to perpetuate the idea that infertility is prevalent more among women from higher socioeconomic classes, while women from lower socioeconomic strata have to manage their fertility in order to curb population growth. In a patriarchal society like India, medicine and technology are imparted by establishments which are governed by these predominant values and construct womanhood as synonymous to motherhood. The boom of this privatized baby-making industry runs on the pervasiveness of this ideology, making such technologies a tool of governing women's reproductive choices by guaranteeing women the choice of an authentic biological motherhood. This choice that is provided is a false one, as it is a choice between compulsory motherhood or not being a mother and falling within the category of abnormal, dysfunctional or unhealthy, thereby requiring medical attention to correct the perceived effect. This kind of meta-narrative that works through political, religious, symbolic ideology takes away any chance of agency that women may have over their own fertility and reproductive choices. According to Gupta, fertility and infertility are both viewed as diseases that need biomedical solutions, and solutions for both of these are acted upon women's bodies, subjecting them to control from both state policies and from a private health market. ARTs have also been brought about a change in the way healthcare is perceived and administered. The advent of ARTs has also brought about the practice of self-monitoring and self-regulation. Owing to the pervasive nature of these treatments, women are required to constantly monitor their bodies like body temperature, days and dates of menstrual cycles, dietary patterns according to nutritionists, regulating body weight, etc. All these everyday micro practices are built into the narrative of medicalization and are taken over by women who opt for such treatments. And lack of success of the treatment, that is not conceiving a viable pregnancy, is a failure that is located within the bodies of the women. Women tend to blame themselves for the lack of success of these treatments, even though these treatments have 30 to 35% chance of being successful. It is generally noted that women tend to blame themselves for this because they perceive others as blaming them. This corresponds to the physician's orientation to the program as well. The woman is treated as a primary patient even when the physiological cause of infertility does not lie within her. This exacerbates the responsibility that women feel towards reproduction because treatments do focus on treating only women. The increasing medicalization of reproductive arena has placed greater constraints of women's choice and agency vis-a-vis a reproductive life. A pro-natalist culture within patriarchal social setup, reconceptualizing gender and health, Section 4. The prevalence of ARTs also has led to the availability and acceptance of the practice of surrogacy. Till the recent amendment to the Draft Assisted Reproductive Technology Bill, which limits altruistic surrogacy to married couples residing in India, surrogacy was a commercial practice. The entire practice of surrogacy was unregulated and was allowed to grow into a viable business without any policy on the ethical implications of the same. The practice of surrogacy brought into question the ethical dilemma of the rights of the surrogate mother vis-a-vis that of the commissioning parents. It also brought into the question the exploitation of women from lower socioeconomic strata who are commissioned to become surrogates on the basis of the need for money. These new types of ethical complications have to be taken into consideration while formulating health policies in the country. The old rhetoric of reproductive health policies which treat women in an instrumentalist fashion have to be reconceptualized along the lines of women's rights and agencies of exercising their reproductive choices. In the light of ARTs, there needs to be a better designed models of gathering data pertaining to infertility. Numerous small-scale quantitative studies suggest that primary fertility exists only among 2% of the entire population. The majority of reasons for infertility are preventive in nature, like untreated STDs, reproductive tract infections, medical interventions under hygienic conditions, and such. Lack of awareness regarding non-terminal methods of contraception, lack of access to proper health care, fear of social stigma, the decisions of using intra-urine devices rather than barrier methods increase the chances of women contracting STDs, which in many turn may contribute to infertility. There has to be a more sensitive understanding of women's position within the household and their ability to express or articulate the concerns owing to the lagging socio-cultural infrastructure by framing healthcare policies for women. In India, women operate within a very constrained box in the area of sexual and reproductive health and have an alarming lack of agency in these matters. The advent of new and rapidly developing technologies in the field of reproduction administered by a profit-oriented private health sector in the face of lack of general health care by public administration convolute an already complicated scenario of women's health. Women's health need to focus on empowerment as a process through which women are enabled to analyze their own situations, decide their priorities, and take action based on informed choices. Instead of treating women's empowerment as an instrument or a means to an end, empowerment needs to be looked at more holistically from a perspective of women's right. Datta and Mishra surmise that this objective needs to be fulfilled in two ways. Making policymakers understand that gender relations are central to reproductive health and cannot be looked at individually. This concept of joint focus needs to be translated into policies that actually enable women, that is, these women need to operate on two levels. First, address immediate health requirements, and second, tackle long-term issues of gender-based power relations. Healthcare programs need to be situated within the broader context of women's expressed and unexpressed needs and imagined together with women's rights rather than two separate categories. To elucidate, Datta and Mishra give example of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is a violation of women's rights as a full human beings who have the right to live with dignity and respect, but violence also has a long-term impact on women's health, both physical and mental, and also reduces the amount of control women have over their own bodies. Despite overwhelming evidence that violence has long-term impact on women's health, Indian policymakers have treated gender-based violence only as women's rights and concerns. In not addressing violence as a health concern, reproductive and sexual health policies are seen as parallel and pseudo examples, sometimes even contradictory to rights. Another example given by authors is that of preventing HIV among sex workers, and this is done in order to ensure that HIV does not spread. Rather than ensuring health sex workers' rights to proper sexual health care or the right to earn a livelihood, where the latter is often put in jeopardy by the prevalence of arrest solicitation. Therefore, there is a need for sustained advocacy on the linkages between rights and health, otherwise there is a chance that state will end up with regressive policies that infringe on individual rights in the light of promoting public health. In her analysis of the reproductive and child health policy of 1995, Kumar points out to the trend of using language of gender equality in the policies. She notes that the usage of the concept of gender has led to the adoption of gender-neutral policies rather than gender-sensitive ones. It has caused reproductive health needs to be subsumed under larger developmental goals. The health discussion has moved away from sexual and reproductive health concerns of women to needs of the community. This move again confuses equality with similarity. The 1995 policy homogenized men and women and their reproductive health needs and was couched in the language of gender, which the embodied being of a woman and abstracts her as an individual who is a part of the larger community. In order to ensure that women gain full benefits of a proper healthcare system, policies need to be gender sensitive and understand the differential location of women vis-a-vis others in the community, and this requires special address. In summary, we could see that gender and health in India remains a topic that is complicated by the whole idea in terms of the gender bias, which is seen and reflected within the larger policies. It is because the policies within India are framed within the larger socio-structural and cultural biases of the society, especially in terms of its patriarchy. Further, women in India are already form a vulnerable group and a marginalized group, and therefore women's health in India is never seen in terms of women's rights, but mostly in terms of understanding of their health in terms of reproduction, especially in terms of maternal health.